We have made you presenter, but before I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction, so you will be able to handle your own presentation, okay?
Great.
Okay, good. So thank God we were able to sort this out, and welcome to you all to this series of NDC Spotlight. As you know, this is a series of very short webinars in which the primary focus of this is just to give a space to countries to present their NDCs in a very short and succinct way. We have other topics. Last week we had a short presentation about the UNFCCC process. Next week we are going to have the EU. You will find all in our announcements. Today we have the benefit of having Brazil with us, a major player in the UNFCCC, both politically, also substantively. So it is a pleasure for me to have you here. I understand we have two speakers. First, Adriano is the Director of the Department of Monitoring and Support for Climate Action in the Ministry of Environment, and I'm not sure, I think that Jose Domingo González Miguel is also going to take part on this webinar. He's the Director of Policies on Climate Change of the same ministry. So without any further introduction, I thank you, Adriano, and Jose Domingo for this. So the floor is yours. Oh, by the way, if you have any questions, and I'm talking to the attendees, please send them to us by chat so I can transfer them to the panelists. Sorry for that long introduction. Adriano, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Claudio, and my apologies for the delay because of the technical problems, but I would like first to check with the attendees if they are sharing the presentation right now, if it's okay.
Yes, we can see it, that the presentation is on the screen.
Great, great. Well, and answering you, I have here Mr. Miguel by my side, and we provided the presentation together. And going straight to the presentation, we would like first to thank the UNFCCC Secretariat for inviting us to briefly highlight the efforts being taken to implement Brazilian NDC. Dr. Miguel and I prepared some slides. We are not going through all the slides, however, they will be available for further consultation. First, Brazil informed to the UNFCCC a very ambitious contribution in terms of mitigation. The absolute target is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 37% below 2005 levels in 2025, with a subsequent indicative contribution to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 43% below 2005 levels in 2030. Going strictly to the guiding questions, which areas are priority areas and why? In order to answer those questions, we invite the webinar participants to go to the additional information about Brazilian NDC for clarification purposes contained in the document submitted to the UNFCCC for more detailed information. However, we'd like to take the advantage under this NDC Spotlight to provide some brief comments on which areas are priority areas and why. First, from a global approach, according to the IPCC, global scenarios consistent with a likely chance to keep temperature change below 2 degrees relative to pre-industrial levels are characterized inter alia by sustainable use of bioenergy, large-scale measures relating to land use change in forests, tripling to nearly quadrupling the share of zero and low carbon energy supply globally by the year 2050. Second, from a national approach, according to Brazil greenhouse gas emission profile, almost 90%, and I share a figure with you, almost 90% of emissions come from energy, agriculture, and land use change and forestry. It's relevant to note that the Brazilian emission profile changed significantly from 2005 to 2014. The emissions were reduced from 2.1 gigatons of CO2 equivalent in 2005 to 1.3 gigatons CO2 equivalent in 2014, which means a 40% reduction in the period 2005-2014. A significant part of this reduction is due to the decrease in the land use change and forest sector. The land use change and forest sector has traditionally been responsible for the largest portion of our emission profile. As you see in the screen, 56% in 2005. From 2004 onwards, however, the continuous drop in emissions in the LULUCF stands out, as can be seen in the 2014 numbers, effectively changing our emissions profile. In 2014, LULUCF contributed to 18% of the total greenhouse gas emissions. What you see in the screen now is the evolution of the deforestation rate since 1988 in square kilometers per year. The reduction of Brazilian Amazon deforestation rate was 71% since 2004 by 2016. Hence, Brazil intends to implement further measures that are consistent with the 2 degrees Celsius temperature goal, as well as national greenhouse gas emissions profile. Some examples of those measures are zero illegal deforestation by 2030 in the Brazilian Amazonia, and compensating the emissions resulting from legal suppression of vegetation by 2030. Another important measure is the restoration and reforestation of 12 million hectares of forests by 2030 for multiple uses. Just to give you an idea of comparison, it is equal to the territory of England. Almost the territory of England we are intending to promote restoration and reforestation. And we have some qualitative measures we are not going to detail right now. In energy, the target is 45% share of renewable energy in energy profile by 2030, including the expansion of renewable energy sources beyond hydro in the energy supply to a share between 28 to 33% by 2030. In addition, increase of sustainable biofuels share in the energy supply to approximately 18% by 2030. In the electricity sector, expansion of domestic use of non-fossil sources of energy, increasing the share of renewable energy beyond hydro again in the power supply to at least 23% by 2030. Just to give an idea again, it means almost double the power supply that we have currently in Brazil in the electricity mix. And we are doing so, increasing the share of wind power, biomass, and solar. And finally, in the energy sector, reach efficiency gains around 10% in the power sector by 2030. In agriculture, in livestock, the main measures are to promote 15 million hectares additional restoration of degraded pasture lands by 2030, and 5 million hectares increment of integrated systems. I'm referring to crops, livestock, forestry by 2030. In other areas, we have some qualitative measures. In industry, new standards for clean technology, energy efficiency measures, low carbon infrastructure. In the transportation efficiency measures, improvement of infrastructure for transport, and improvement of public transportation in urban areas. What are the next and the first steps to initiate implementation? First, the implementation has already started in Brazil. The post-2020 action has already started in Brazil. I would like to flag this. We can provide some examples. The action plan for the prevention and control of deforestation in the legal Amazon, called in Portuguese PPCEDAN, it was launched in 2004 as an effort to federal government to reduce deforestation rates in legal Amazon. The plan is periodically revised, and it has already had 3 previous phases. The first phase, 2004 until 2008, the second phase, 2009 to 2011, and the third phase from 2012 to 2015. The fourth phase, considering 2016 and 2020 period, is currently under implementation, and it is relevant instrument to implement the measures contained in our NDC. And the huge decrease in the Amazon deforestation rates that I showed previously is due to mainly to this kind of policies on the ground. Another example, use of biofuels for transportation. Regulation mandates the addition of ethanol in gasoline. It's around 25% and values fluctuate according to the market, as well as of biodiesel in fossil diesel, currently in the percentage of 8%, moving up to 10%. Last year, a federal law mandated that the percentages of mandatory blending of biodiesel into diesel sold to the final consumers in any part of the national territory should be 8% by March 2017, 9% by March 2018, and 10% by March 2019. The law also authorizes that starting in 2019, the biodiesel blending may reach 15% after tests and trials to validate the use of the biodiesel blend to the diesel sold to the final consumer. Finally, another example that we are putting on the ground, in December 2010, the installed capacity for wind power plants was 927 megawatts. In December 2015, the capacity was 7.6 gigawatts for wind power plants. In 5 years, the installed capacity increased more than 8 times. In addition to the measures already being implemented, the government is elaborating a specific NDC implementation strategy for implementing and pursuing finance to the actions and measures required to achieve Brazil's NDC targets. Brazilian government is collecting technical inputs to elaborate the NDC implementation strategy through a broad discussion and consultations with public and private sectors, including the identification of sustainable business models that can support the implementation of NDC activities. In parallel, the Brazilian Forum on Climate Change will be responsible for another broad consultative process with civil society and make recommendations to the government which will contribute to the elaboration of the NDC implementation strategy. We have these two parallel approaches, one from the government side, one for the Forum on Climate Change side, and the Forum will provide some inputs coming from the society. Just to clarify, the Forum was established in 2000 to promote the dialogue and the coordination between the federal government and society, representative institutions, non-governmental organizations, social movements, and other stakeholders. After the strategy adoption, it's expected to be implemented and monitored. However, I'd like to highlight again that some measures are being implemented already, as I said before. Finally, the last question, what are the obstacles and barriers for the implementation? The first challenge we are envisaging is to guarantee the necessary level of support, particularly finance, as well as the imperative involvement of the private sector and other relevant stakeholders. Another challenge we envisage is to revise the Brazilian governance on climate change in light of the NDC and the Paris Agreement. One of the objectives of this review is to optimize financial and human resources, thus avoiding duplication of efforts. The domestic governance needs to be reassessed, considering that the Brazilian contribution to the Paris Agreement is of economy-wide nature. So, lessons learned as well as gaps identified will reorient the implementation of the NDC, now based on the new national and international context brought by the NDC and the Paris Agreement. Such arrangements may be improved or expanded to encompass the additional measures present in the Brazilian NDC. So I think here I stop the initial presentation, and Dr. Miguel and I are here to consider some questions from the attendee, and I would like to thank you again and apologize for the delay regarding the technical problems, but I hope to recuperate the time lost in the beginning. Thank you very much, Claudio. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Adriano. We are receiving some questions, and I'll feed them to you as they come. And again, I encourage participants to send them through the chat. We have one. I mean, I don't know how politically charged are these questions, so I'll just send them as they go. The first one is there's a question on legal deforestation and how you have addressed legal deforestation in the target, and how much do you expect in the near future? That's one. And I'll give you the other, I think, politically charged question is about the challenges that you have experienced with the NDC, given the political situation of Brazil, if that has had a negative effect, and how you have mitigated it.
We must to answer now, or we collect other questions, Claudio?
Well, I have a bunch of questions here, so I'll give them to you two by two.
Okay. Well, the first one, I would like to clarify that we are referring to legal suppression of vegetation. It's part of the Brazilian legislation. In the subnational level, in these states, some states have the right regarding this legal suppression of vegetation. So it's part of the legislation in Brazil, and the idea is to compensate the emissions from this legal suppression of vegetation to compensate the illegal deforestation in Amazon. We are not referring to compensate areas of deforestation from a biome to another biome. We are saying that we will compensate the emissions from the legal suppression regarding the deforestation, but I don't know if Miguel would like to clarify something here about this point.
The legal suppression, as was said by Adriano, is authorized by the state legislation, of the subnational legislation. So it's for several purposes, like developing new roads or mining or other type of human intervention. But the idea in the NDC is to try to compensate the emissions of this legal suppression of vegetation through equivalent absorption of CO2 equivalent by means of restoration or reforestation from planted forests. So the idea is to, not in area, in terms of area, but in terms of the carbon content, we try to compensate all the legal suppression of vegetation by means of this restoration of native forest or plantations of reforestation of planted forest.
And Claudio, there is a second part in your question. Could you repeat, please, the second part?
Yes, it was about the political situation now in Brazil, whether it has affected the process of NDC implementation and the policies, and if such, what actions have been taken to mitigate it.
No, as I referred previously, we presented some very important measures that we are taking already. And I would like to highlight that climate change policy is a state approach and a policy coming from the Brazilian states. And of course, the political context, we need to consider it, but we are committed to implement our measures, and we are very committed to implement the measures that we are referring to our NDC.
Just to complement, up to 2030, we are going to have 4 elections in Brazil. So that means that we are not dependent on what the next government will do or the current government will do, because this is a long-term planning, and the measures are related to the long-term emissions trends of Brazil and not to particular current situation or future situation.
To read, thank you. There's 3 more questions that I'm going to read. The first one is, what is the actual status of the introduction of carbon pricing mechanisms or markets? Then, how is the private sector and the civil society being engaged? We have also a question about protection of indigenous communities and indigenous territories, considering that they constitute the largest protected forested areas. And then a last question is, and maybe it's more about explaining a bit better the target. It says that Adriano has showed that Brazil already achieved 40% reduction in 2014, which is commendable. And the question is, what are the difficulties to use such figure as a goal for 2025? I guess it's more about explaining exactly what the NDC is. Yes, Adriano.
Yes, you passed the first question regarding carbon price and market mechanisms to Dr. Miguel, and we can consider the subsequent questions you put to us. But I would like to give the floor to Mr. Miguel to consider market mechanisms.
Yeah, for Brazil, the CDM is very important. We have developed almost 380 projects in CDM in Brazil, and we have an estimated 400 million tons of the CO2 emission reduction in 7 years. So it was a huge effort, and it builds capacity, human capacity in terms of the DOEs, project developers, and also the companies trying to design projects to reduce emissions. So it's very important. We don't have any system of the carbon price in Brazil. We have a small, let's say, type of carbon tax in the diesel and gasoline in Brazil. But as I said before by Adriano, the gasoline is a mix of the ethanol, dehydrate the ethanol, and gasoline, pure gasoline. The current mix is 27.5% of dehydrated ethanol in the gasoline. So actually we don't have pure gasoline in Brazil, but this gasoline, this mix is carbon tax in a sense, with a small fee in Brazil, both diesel and gasoline. But we plan to have a major effort to put in place Article 6 of the Paris Accords in order to continue to have the involvement of the private sector in designing and reducing emissions through Article 6 project development.
Yeah, considering the engagement of civil society, Claudio, as you see in the screen right now, it's one of the slides that we were not going through previously, but I would like to remind that when we elaborated the NDC, there was a comprehensive and inclusive public consultation coordinated by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs since 2014. And we promoted additional dialogues between high-level segments in the Brazilian government and relevant stakeholders, government, private sector, academia, NGOs, and the NDC elaboration strategy. The same approach is being adopted. We initiated the discussions with the society since the beginning of the discussions regarding the strategy of implementation, and we are very engaged to ample aspects of stakeholders being considered in regarding the inputs that we are receiving to consider in the strategy of implementation of our NDC. Regarding the difficulties to 2025, as you said before, we are in a very low level of emissions. Brazil achieved a very low level of emissions already, and we have some challenges regarding the population increase in the future. We need to consider the economic issues to increase the economy in Brazil. So the challenge is very huge in regarding to promote reducing emissions until 2025, but the NDC is a very ambitious one, and we are committed to implement the measures contained in our NDC.
Yeah, just to complement, the emissions are still very high. Well, we cannot say that 1.3 billion tons of CO2 is a small emission. But anyway, compared to, as I said by Adriano, to the population size, we have 200 and almost 10 million people in Brazil currently, and the size of territory and also the GDP of Brazil, it is commensurate with these figures. But anyway, the efforts of the NDC is try to decrease even further this emission, because we want to continue to our trend to use a lot of renewable energy in the future, and we are in a very good position to do so. In the past and currently, we are around 40% or 42% in this range of the renewable energy in the energy profile. The NDC wants to or wish to go to further down to 45%. So in the energy profile. So the use of the renewables in the energy sector. So this will be challenging, because you see, you cannot say that it's a small addition to the percentage from 42 to 45, because actually 42 was the level of participation in 2012. And we are talking about 45% in the participation in 2030. The size of the GDP, the size of population will be much larger than it was in 2014. So you cannot compare just the percentages of the participation of renewables in the energy profile because of this, because the country is growing, the population is growing, and the new percentage will be a larger slice of the pizza, because the pizza will be larger than the previous pizza.
Mm-hmm. And I would like to thank Miguel for reminding us that 1.3 gigatons of CO2 equivalent is a very huge emissions yet. But of course, when I was referring to a low level of emissions, I'm referring to the comparison to 2005 levels. But of course, Miguel reminded us and highlighted that the challenge in reducing this amount of emissions that we are facing now is a very huge challenge, just to clarify that.
Thank you very much. I think that we're running out of time. I want to tell you that we're receiving very positive feedback here with the presentation. They're congratulating you for being so clear. There is two additional questions, and I would like to stop it here because we need to close. One is, what happens if the policies to combat deforestation do not achieve what you expect? Do you have a plan B? And the second is something that got left unanswered. If you can speak a little bit about the indigenous communities, Adriano, and with that, we're going to close the webinar for today.
Yes, regarding combat deforestation, if you consider the historical profile, Brazil has achieved a very, very huge reduction in terms of Brazilian Amazon deforestation rates. We decreased a lot, and the commitment continue regarding the future. Of course, we faced some reversions in the recent past regarding the increase in deforestation, but if you consider the last 10, 12 years, we see that the reduction is consistent and very concrete in terms of reduction of Amazon deforestation rates. It's showing us that we need to improve some other instruments other than command and control. We are achieving the level of command and control regarding the combat of deforestation rates. We are promoting through the PPCDAN plan, as I referred before, to consider other approaches to, in addition to command and control, bringing the economic value of forestries, the territory ordenament. So we have some very, very important measures to combat deforestation. We are committed to continue that. And regarding the involvement of indigenous communities, since the beginning, we are consulting with the communities. We have some very important policies to consider the community regarding indigenous people. And last Monday, in the World Environment Day, the government expanded 5 protected areas, so we have some very important policies to continue combating deforestation. We are committed to continue with this kind of policies in regard to our very ambitious NDC commitments. But Miguel?
Yeah, just to complement. First, in regard to conservation units, we consider the indigenous people areas also conservation units. So they are protecting in the same way that we have areas of the Amazon protected. And a large portion of the Amazon is consisting of the indigenous areas and conservation units. So these are protected. In regard to deforestation, it's a very complex system that we have established through satellites. It's very sophisticated. It has the processing of all the images that are gathered through the passage of the satellites in the Amazon, and we are processing all these images, and then we have a very difficult logistical problem to send the police and the legal people to act on the area. Normally the area has no road, or we have to access the area through helicopters or through boats, and it's a very complex, as I said, and very costly logistics to combat deforestation. We had the fortunate support from these efforts because the costs are very high and they are incurred by the Brazilian government mainly, but we had support from Norway and Germany especially, and we plan to have in the near future support also from UK. So, but this is a very complex system because you have to keep the enforcement all the time. So if you have a budget problem as we have now, so people feel that the enforcement has been reduced, they increase deforestation. So it's a permanent surveillance, permanent effort to try to enforce the legislation, because the deforestation is illegal mainly in the Amazon. So because the area is property of the state and is being invaded in the forest. So that is an illegal situation. We are trying to combat this through enforcement of legislation.
I know that we are running out of time, Claudio, but I'd just like to take advantage on this last point commented by Miguel and refer to another slide regarding the implementation, the means of implementation associated to the NDC, to highlight that our NDC is not contingent upon international support, but of course it welcomes international support from developed countries, and Miguel referred to Germany and Norway regarding Amazon Fund. And we are committed to try to seek financial support regarding the NDC implementation here in Brazil, just to put again this very important point from our side.
Okay, we unfortunately have run out of time. There's other questions that remain unanswered. For that, I apologize, but we need to close the system. In any case, I would like to thank Adriano and Jose for this very, very interesting webinar. As I said at the beginning, this is going to be posted on our website for you to consult it at any time. And again, I'll see you next time with the European Union. Again, thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you, Claudio.
Thank you.